I don't know about tomorrow. I just live from day to day. I don't borrow from its sunshine, for its skies may turn to gray. I don't worry o'er the future, for I know what Jesus said, and today I'll walk beside him, for he knows what is ahead. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. Every step is getting brighter as the golden stairs I climb. Every burden's getting lighter. Every cloud is silver lined. There the sun is always shining. There no tear will dim the eye. At the ending of the rainbow, where the mountains touch the sky. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand. I don't know about tomorrow. It may bring me poverty, but the one who feeds the sparrow is the one who stands by me. And the path that be my portion may be through the flame or flood, but his presence goes before me, and I'm covered with his blood. Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand.
Our lesson this evening is going to come from a lesson, we're still in lesson 54. We are at subdivision E, and the lesson tonight, at least the first part of it, is coming out of Matthew chapter 13, 31 to 35. And we'll also get something from Mark 4, 30 to 34. So we have a couple different places that the lesson is coming from this evening. We've been looking at the what a lot of people call the kingdom parables, trying to lay out some aspects about the kingdom of heaven and its growth, about the proclamation of the gospel, just a lot of information that as disciples of Christ, if we spend some time looking at those, we gain better insight to our enemy, the devil, some of his tactics. We get better insight into why people sometimes do what they do, and we also get insight of our responsibilities, what we have a responsibility to do, and what, again, is not in our framework. We have to leave some of it to God and to the hearts of others as we sow the seed of the kingdom. And so if you're really wanting to study a lot about the church, there's a lot of good information in here as far as building the church, growing the church. There's a lot of great lessons that can be gleaned from this. And so tonight, as I said, we're going to be kind of bouncing between the two, but if you're in Matthew 13, 31 through 35, you'll get most of what we're covering. Of course, if you have the actual workbook, you can follow along with that. Another parable, we're told, said he before them, saying, and we're told he said unto them, how shall we liken the kingdom of God? Or in a parable shall we set it forth? The kingdom of heaven is like unto a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field. A grain of mustard seed, which when it is sown upon the earth, though indeed it be, is less than all the seeds that are upon the earth. But yet when it is grown or grows up, when it is grown, it becometh greater than all the herbs, and putteth out great branches, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of heaven come and can lodge under the shadow thereof, in the branches thereof. So we'll start with that parable this evening and discussing that. We talk about the having faith of a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Jesus at one point, and again, it's not specifically here, but at one point said if we had the faith of a mustard seed, we could say to that mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and it would be removed and cast into the sea. So that came to my mind this week. Some of you may have seen it on Facebook, but some company is selling it's a necklace. It's a round necklace, and it has I'm assuming it's like clear plastic or crystal on both sides, and in the middle there's like mountains. There's a divide that looks like the WVU kind of mountain logo, Mountaineers logo. And then between those two pieces of crystal and underneath the mountains is a mustard seed. And so the whole aspect of that has to do with the faith of a mustard seed, and bring that back. And in many ways, we find that the kingdom of heaven and having faith, it is tied together, and having faith in what God has done. God planned the kingdom from the foundation of the world. He put forth a great amount of effort. He proclaimed it through Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning Jesus and the things that would take place. And we have to have faith that if God has been preparing these things from the foundation of the world. And he waited until the fullness of time was come before he sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under law. If all those things God did, we have to accept that when he's telling us these parables about the kingdom and we're learning principles of the kingdom, we have to put our faith that he knows how it will best grow, how to best address individuals and sin and all the various aspects of proclaiming the gospel. There's just a lot that comes into play. About everything we do, generally, we should have a plan. And Chris and us were talking about that before service, about the Board of Education trying to figure out how to save some money on building the Duval School, and sitting down and looking at the plans, seeing how they can adjust the plans to make it better fit the budget that they've got. And if we can do that, if we're, as humans, smart enough to sit down with plans and we can, again, spend time looking at it, rearranging it for our benefit, then surely we can accept the fact that God didn't just throw something together and send it to us, that he spent some time, again, even though he knows all, he put effort and time into those things. Now, some people who've read this, they see that statement that the mustard seed is the smallest of seeds. And people, again, will say, well, see, now there's proof that the Bible contradicts itself, because there are many other seeds that are smaller than a mustard seed. Well, generally in this part of the world, the mustard seed was the smallest seed that farmers would actually take time to plant, rather than like wheat. Wheat was broadcast. We talk about planting wheat, but you really don't plant it like you do bean seeds or corn. You don't make a row and go through there dropping down wheat seeds. And as we've seen in the previous parables, you broadcast that. You just go out flinging it around and letting it fall into the soil, and what it does, it does. But the parable was talking about the mustard seed as being one of the smallest seeds that farmers in that place at that time would be planting and attempting to grow. But even though it was one of the smallest, or the smallest seed that the farmers in that area planted, the end results of that was mighty. Now, every time I look at this lesson, I think about around here, and I say it this way, around here, why do we plant mustard? For the greens. We plant the seed and the mustard grows up, and we can't wait for the leaf to get big enough that we could do what? Pick it. We cut it just like lettuce. And so we don't really grow mustard here to, put 1 grain of mustard or 2 grains of mustard seed in the ground and let it grow up and go to seed, so that we can collect the mustard seeds on the top and crush them and make spices with. We just go down to the store and get, mustard seed. Yeah.
Brother Brian, he talks about the smallest seed, says, which indeed is the least of all seeds, but when it's grown, it is the greatest among herbs. And that's something else that you don't see other herbs growing that large.
Yeah. We don't. Again, most people, at least around here, and I don't know in other countries, but they want the greens. Some places will let it grow. They'll take some greens and they'll leave some so the plant will grow, and they gather the mustard seed, and of course they crush it and they use it in cooking. Of course, we've always, Mom would plant mustard, but we were never interested in letting it grow till it got the seeds and gathering the seeds. We just go to the store and buy mustard seed if you're going to put it in stuff. But over in the Holy Land, here, of course, if you let mustard grow until the fall, when the first frost comes, what's going to happen? It's going to die out. But in these Middle Eastern countries where sometimes their winters are not that bad, and again, mustard seed is planted and left to grow, not just one season, but maybe through a second season and through the rainy season, and it keeps on growing. And the mustard seed will actually produce a plant which is big enough that it looks like a tree. It grows to that extent. And Jesus said, not only that, but the birds of the air, it gets big enough that the birds will actually build nests in that. And for some people here, that they've never seen that. I've never really seen it. But years ago when I was studying this, I was reading from Albert Barnes, which was a minister, and he wrote commentaries in, I believe, the 1800s. And he was speaking about these verses, and he was talking about in the Holy Land. Of course, at that time, you traveled by horse or you traveled by camel or whatever, but he was making a comment that in the 1800s that these mustard plants that were let grow or seeds that just, again, grew on their own because birds got into it and scattered it or whatever. But he said it wasn't uncommon to see mustard plants that were as tall or taller than a rider on a horse. That where these plants continued to grow and they built up a stem and continued and branched out, that a rider on his horse, it was as high as that or higher in some places. And all that comes from that simple little seed that is sown, and it's sown in faith like all other seeds. And, we've talked about, worry is not going to necessarily make it do any better. And so there has to be that point of faith where you just plant it. And again, when you're talking about a garden, you may hoe it and get some of the weeds out. But the lesson that Jesus had was that the kingdom of heaven is going to begin very small. Now, the time that Jesus was preaching and traveling, we read that multitudes followed him. But there is distinguished along the way the multitudes, the disciples, the Jews, which that usually refers to the Jewish leaders. The multitudes were just people coming from every direction for every reason. But the disciples were the ones who really traveled with him in the quiet times, would sit with him, such as we've studied in Matthew 24 when he left after the Last Supper and went up, before he left, before they had the Last Supper, he went up onto the Mount of Olives, and he had talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, and they came to him, Peter and Andrew, James and John, asking him about those things. And so while there were multitudes of people who followed him, by the time we come to Acts, the 2nd chapter, the disciples that were still gathering together there as Jesus had spoke with them was about 120. And on the day of Pentecost, the 12 apostles were together in one place when the Holy Spirit came upon them, and we witnessed that. And even though it began in Jerusalem, it didn't begin with a multitude of disciples. It began with the 12, and with them perhaps up to a total of 120 that were speaking and teaching and interpreting and baptizing there on the day of Pentecost. And by the end of the day, there was added to them, we're told, about 3,000. And these individuals continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, fellowship, breaking bread, prayers. We see all of that. But compared to the number of people that come into Jerusalem, that's a relatively small amount, even the 3,120, if you look at it that way. That's still a small amount of people compared to how many priests there were and how many other people were there for the day of Pentecost. There were Jews, devout men from all over the earth, which were there in the city of Jerusalem. And this was one of the main days. So the church didn't start kind of like sowing a field of wheat. While Jesus taught through Galilee and Samaria and Judea about the kingdom, it actually started, the seed was actually planted to take root and grow in Jerusalem. And Jesus had told them in Acts, the first chapter, that they would begin there in Jerusalem, wait in Jerusalem, and they would go from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the uttermost parts of the earth. And that's the image that we have here of the mustard seed growing up into a great tree. If you would have taken the 12 off to the side before the day of Pentecost and told them, let me tell you what's going to happen in a couple thousand years. That there is going to be church buildings from one side of the world to the other in every city, in places where there's a curve in the road. People will be worshiping and praising and serving Jesus. How do you think they would have reacted to that? Be hard to believe, wouldn't it? I mean, the religious leaders had killed Jesus, and they were still, in the early days, they arrested Peter and John at the temple and put them in a hold overnight. It's kind of hard to accept, that where things were going and the struggles that they had many times with the congregations, the things that we see. Paul says that there was daily the care of all the churches on his mind. But that little seed has went out and it has sprouted and it has put down roots and it has established itself and it has sent out branches, and there are people from all over the world that come and lodge in the branches of that, find refuge in that. And so this is just another parable as we look at it today and see the fulfillment thereof, that we have to accept the fact that God knows what he's doing. That, he chose to establish and start the church the way that he did, with the people that he did. It spread as it did, and it spread just like sowing the seed. They went everywhere preaching the gospel. In Acts 8, when it talks about the persecution that arose after the stoning of Stephen, and when Saul was consenting unto his death, and they went and they buried Stephen, when the persecution came on the church, many were scattered, and they went everywhere preaching the Word of God. And so just like that broadcasting of the wheat, they went everywhere preaching to everybody. And just like the parable of the soil, some fell in good ground, some fell in stony ground, some fell by the wayside. Some things the the cares and troubles of the world gobbled it up. The devil tried to build and plant tares in the middle of the wheat to confuse things and cause problems, things that look the same but are different, trying to confuse people. And so all these parables give us some good insight into the kingdom. Does anyone have any comments or questions down through there? In another parable, Jesus puts forth, much as the mustard seed. Again, I don't mean to be sexist, but the mustard seed parable, that's kind of geared toward the farmer, and the parable here of the leavening is kind of addressed to the woman of the house, something else. These two parables kind of cover the same thing. And in this particular case, it talks about leaven and the use of that in the homes. And so he says, another parable spake he, and then the kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened. All these things Jesus spake in parables unto the multitudes, and many such parables spake he the word unto them as they were able to hear it. Without a parable spake he not, or nothing unto them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things hidden from the foundation of the world. But privately to his own disciples he expounded all things. In that time, today if you're going to usually bake bread, you're going to go to the store and you're going to get a package of yeast, and most of the recipes call for so much yeast and so much flour and baking powder and baking soda, and it has all that. And so we're kind of used to getting yeast from the store and following Fleshman's, I guess. I think that's the name of it. It's probably one of the most popular ones that are around. That's what Mom always used. She thought that was the best. So, but in that day, you didn't go to the store and get what we think of as yeast today, or leaven, to raise things. What you did is you saved back some of the dough. And you let that dough, the yeast and all that was in that dough, continue to kind of ferment and work its way through that. And so when you were ready to bake, you would, and as Jesus says here, you take 3 measures of flour and you mix that with like you're going to do that with the liquid and all that. Then you put that piece of dough that you saved back in there and you stir it up. And that's where your leaven comes from. You hide that back so that, again, you have leaven for the next time. And so you didn't buy it, you just kept it, and you pinched off a piece and you used that in the next batch. And I can't remember the bread company, but there was a thing I saw on TV a while back, and one of these bread companies, they've been using the same leavening, the same starter dough for like 100 or 150 years. And they have, they make a big pot of flour and they mix it all together and they put that seed in there of the leavening that they save over from the last batch, and they stir all that into the flour, and they let it raise, and then they use that to make that batch of bread with, and they take some out and they hold it over to the next batch they're making, and I don't know how much they keep, but it was like 100 or 150 years. They said they had been basically doing that same process of saving back the starter leavening for the bread, which they used, and they were making it out of an old family recipe that Granny used to have, I guess. And of course, back then they probably didn't make 500 loaves of bread a day or whatever, but it was a way of doing things. And so Jesus speaks of the kingdom of heaven being a lot like this. And again, the Jewish women, the Jewish mothers, the cooks, the deeper into these things, again, as I said, they get a pretty good story. And we can all shake our head and say, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I know that's what that is. Don't know why he talked to us about it, but yeah, that's pretty good. I don't know what the kingdom of heaven would have to do with a mustard seed or a lump of leavening or a farmer sowing seed in the field. All these things, I don't know what he's... And so many people, no doubt, again, continue to follow him to get the freebies, that the sick would be healed and the blind would receive their sight, and the deaf ears would be opened, and those who were paralyzed could be restored, and those possessed by demons could have them driven out, delivered from that. But sadly, while even today as disciples of Christ, we try to work our way into these parables and look at the explanation that Jesus gives and ask ourselves, how can I make application of that? How can we make application of that today? How can I put myself into this parable and figure out what Jesus wants me today to do with it? Because it doesn't change from what those original disciples were supposed to gain from it and do with it. And so we have to get down in there. And others today will read over stuff once lightly and never glean any great understanding from that. Now, our time is pretty much up for tonight. But as we look at the next section, section F, we're going to get into the parable of the tares and the wheat, an explanation of that. And we see the statement, and I'll just, by way of thinking about that for next week, we're told that he, in Matthew 13:36, he left the multitudes and he went into the house. And then we see his disciples came unto him, saying, explain unto us the parable of the tares of the field. And this is just one example of what we're seeing in here. You know, you were talking about the tares and the wheat and the field. These things that you've been talking about, explain those to us. And emphasis is his disciples. The multitudes didn't come knocking on the door looking for explanations. He went home, he went in the house, and his disciples, as they were given to do, joined him because they were pretty much with him committed to him for that 3 or 3.5 years. And so they wanted an explanation. And so what delight it was to be able to, no doubt, sit in what we would think of today as the living room at the feet of Jesus and hear Jesus give an explanation of these things, carefully and completely helping them to gain insight even further, because these people are the ones who are going to be leaders in the kingdom of heaven.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, A 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in His care as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the churches of Christ salute you.